All right. So we can start off if you would like to introduce yourself and maybe
Yeah,
just a little bit like who you are, what you do right now, that kind of thing.
fantastic. Well, thanks for having me. Natalie Porter. I am an official librarian. I studied and got my degree and all that. So, yeah, skater librarian, I guess.
Yes.
Woohoo! I'm living, I'll do like an acknowledgement because I'm living on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. They're the first nation here on the coast. So like super grateful that I'm here able to skate and work at the library and yeah, so it's just a little bit north of Vancouver, Canada, and it's on the coast and little skate park here. But I do miss the city because there's a lot happening back down in Vancouver. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now, and I work at the local library, and then I nerd out all the time on women in skateboarding. I just really obsessed with it.
It's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
It's so cool.
So how old were you when you started skating?
I must have been around like 16, 17. Like I was had a new job and I found my brother's skateboard and I started cruising to work. But yeah, I was from Ontario, so we're more into snowboarding. So like I started snowboarding in 1988. I was 11 years old. It was like the new cool thing. And then all the guys that I snowboard with were into skateboarding. So it just made sense when there was no snow to to go to the parking lots. And but it wasn't until I came out west, I guess in 96, when I met other girls that I really like got stoked on it. Yeah.
Awesome. That's so cool. So do you have anything you want to ask before
I'm
we
just
start?
like thinking of, just your experience as you identify as a woman.
Yeah, I'm she, her, hers. Thanks
Okay.
for asking. Appreciate it. And yeah.
Yeah, and I also identify with she, her, and
Yeah,
Marina
it was
as
she,
well.
her. We're also both bisexual women.
Yeah.
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 So I'm wondering like what your experience was when you started, and you just mentioned that at the beginning it was really just like your guy friends, and it wasn't until 96 that you kind of start like, oh, there's other
Yeah.
girls, and
Oh yeah.
how was that?
Well, actually, no, I should say there was one other girl at high school who was a bit younger than me. Actually, she's the only person that I keep in touch with from high school. So I had one contact, but yeah, I was a bit older. But
Right.
I knew if I came out west that I'd find like other like-minded girls. And there was like a new skate park that opened up. Michelle Pizzell from Antisocial Skate Shop. She's pretty fantastic. So she was one of my original buddies that I met up with. And yeah, and just sort of having that community around you is just so much more motivating, I
Right.
find. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gonna dive right into this. All right. So what I was really interested in, right? We found out about you because of the Womxn Skate History
Right.
Instagram.
Yeah.
I am an extremely avid reader. I love research. I heavily considered going into library sciences. So when we saw this, I was like, Isa, there's this person doing they're like documenting women's skate history.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
And it's like, first of all, the way that you're doing it is amazing. It's like, no, like visually, it's so cool to just see how you've gathered all of these different magazines, which first of all, I don't even know where you're getting this stuff from.
Oh man, I have like crazy piles, boxes of weird stuff.
It's amazing.
Well,
and just like the things that you write are just like so cool, because I'm sure we'll talk about this, but there's such a lack of representation in women, and to be reading these things and about women that like now some of them have made it.
Yeah.
But at the time it was, I'm sure, a struggle, and it's still a struggle, but
Yeah.
it's so cool to see that process.
Yeah. Part of what I was going to bring up is it's a really great writer named Carmen Maria Machado, who has, when I read one of her books, and she talked about archival silence, right? This term that is about kind of when there is this emptiness about a certain history, and it becomes, whether it's forced or you know, just by coincidence. And this idea that, you know, we lose history when it's not properly documented. And there are, with women's skating history, there is a lot, even when we look at your website, right, there's a lot of people who are not identified. It's
Right.
like, we don't really know who they are now or where they are now.
A mystery.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of like, I'm very interested like in knowing how you came about this idea of filling, whether even you were realizing how you were filling this archival silence.
I love that term. Like, yeah, it really resonates. Because it has some parts of it have been a bit piecemeal. Like I'll see this random ad like going through the Thrasher archives. There's like this girl, Renee Tantillo, in this Venture ad from like 86. And I'm like, who the heck are you? And then you go down these crazy rabbit holes. And it's great with the internet, like, and you know, people tagging names, but some stuff is so elusive, but then it makes it so much more meaningful when you like make the connection and like, oh, they made that zine, they're a riot girl, they're like, and they knew this person. And then like the other day I emailed the Seattle Public Library because they had this zine called Gunk by Remdasha Bixine in their archives, and I can't just zip down to Seattle, so I write them, and then the guy happens to be a skateboarder librarian as well, and he's like, oh, and so he like went off, like he like scanned them for me, and there's like all these photos. So you just have to find these allies that are like out there and do some fun digging, and then just go with these random little hints and like, oh, maybe they misspelled that person's name. Maybe back in the day they changed their name, or there's just all these little elements. So it's a fantastic treasure hunt. I find it's just gold when you find like the kind of a bit of a full story of somebody. It's really
I wonder if, you know, any of the people who you've covered or talked about, have any of them like kind of reached out to you and been like, oh my God, like I didn't even know this about myself. Like, where did you even find this photo?
Yes. So recently I kind of tracked down a woman named KZ Zapata. She was friends of Bonnie Bluin from the 80s who wrote in Thrasher, and I had this tiny picture of her, and so I creeped out on her. I felt so creepy. I went into like some weird Facebook high school university reunion webpage, and I found where she worked at this university, and I emailed her, and I'm like, I'm sorry if this is, but I have to know your story. And she was stoked. She was like, someone I could really admire, like a bit older than me, like she's in her 50s, I'm in my 40s. And so we had a few parallels, and I ended up interviewing her, and I'm like not an interviewer, like I'm not a journalist. I like the research stuff. So it was a little uncomfortable for me, but it went off great. And yeah, I totally was worried that I was going to be creepy. And like, even like Terry Lawrence, who's kind of a legend, when I put up his post, I'm like, oh, I hope I did this like respectful, you know, I got his pronouns right. Like, and he wrote back, and he was like,
wow.
He's like, you're creating a really safe space, keep up the good work. And like, part of the reason why it took me so long to do this project, because I was worried, like, who am I to like, you know, showcase these people? Like, I'm an okay skateboarder, I still skateboard, but I'm not like legendary. So I'm not,
you know what, even the fact that you ask yourself those questions of like, why me? Like, I have, you know, the right to even do this, like it already tells so much about the person that you are, because the reality is that like a lot of people don't ask themselves these questions, and then they'll like, instead of opening up spaces, which is what you've been doing, they'll like open up a space for themselves to talk about themselves and to make everything about themselves.
Like, it's that idea of like, the problem is that people will like stand in the middle of a circle and be like, I want to make space for you, without realizing that you have to leave the circle to make space. You know, like you have to walk out. You can't be standing there being like, oh, come in. It's like,
Right.
no, you need to
Yeah.
go away, you know.
Good.
But it's really interesting because even these things that you're talking about with these kinds of, you know, you're picking together these little things,
Yeah.
you know, it's that total process of like, if you don't do it, these things will be lost, you know, and then
It's-
it becomes this truly, we really are, that history completely becomes silenced and
Because
completely becomes
they have
erased.
been
Mhm.
lost.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been able to, you know, like save a lot of stuff, I would say, but the reality is like the stuff that you don't find, maybe you don't even know that it existed, and you
It's
know
brutal.
who,
Yeah.
right. And it's always obvious that the mainstream media
Mm.
that's not their priority, right?
Yeah.
It's
Pretty
just never
limited.
been, it's not going to be. And even right now that we're seeing this
Like surge.
right, of like women skateboarding,
Huge.
at
Yeah.
times it feels like it, you have to fit still a certain type.
Ah.
You
Yeah.
know? And I'm sure that you saw this throughout
Yeah.
this history of skateboarding as a not cis, a white cis man.
Yeah. Like who gets sort of showcased in the spotlight and the sponsors.
Well, that was a big thing I was
Yeah.
thinking about when I was kind of reading your thesis, and even just looking through like the women's skate history, was thinking a lot about women of color, you know,
Indeed.
thinking about where do they fit already when white women are struggling to
Yeah.
find their place. Where does a Black woman fit in, you know, or where do trans women fit in? It's like, you know, there's barely any room for the white cis women, you know.
Yeah. No, I definitely have a conscious effort to make sure there's some diverse voices being, you know, part of this whole thing. And like I even think back, I was part of this crew called the Skirt Boarders in Montreal. It was like back in 2000, 2003. And so the first person that I've showcased on my website was this woman, Mary France Gravel. She was an Indigenous single mom, part of the
Yeah,
crew.
with her daughter who was sick.
Yeah,
It was insane.
like,
That story was crazy.
oh, like
Amazing.
major props to her and her life. But like, yeah, she's not gonna make the, you know, the centerfold of the skate mag, yeah, or the cover or something. But trying to be mindful of that. But I think that's part of the librarian spirit. I think I've gotten good feedback because people know my intentions are good. I'm not
Right.
trying to make, this is not a monetary effort. This is like purely for the joy of discovery and sharing. Like that's what I want to do. Yeah.
Oh, that's
So I've been,
Yeah,
good
honestly,
feedback.
it's so awesome. It's so refreshing to hear you talk like that. It's so cool.
yeah.
Hey.
I especially think like you know, as there's been this growth of women skating, there has started to be this like competitive element too that is getting complicated, especially when we talk about, for example, like groups that have been emerging that are trying to, like, you know, crews that are trying to focus like women, LGBT, BIPOC people, or like BIPOC. It's like it becomes complicated because even within amongst those circles, there's this unspoken idea of like there's only one seat at the table kind of thing,
Right.
you know, like, and it ends up being this like musical chairs where everyone's fighting over like the one seat, and without realizing that it's like, no, there's room for everybody, but we have to make that room first, you know, like, and that's something that I think is we're gonna see more of this complexity of like, where does competition fit in? Where do people feel like there's not enough room, or there's only room for one, you know, like, and you know, I think that when we open up those spaces to learning, right, with what you're doing, research and understanding, it really, it's really opening up the idea of like, oh, there is room, you know, there's so much room, but we have to make the active effort to make that room, because no one else is going to make it for us, you know.
Call it out.
I was also really interested in like what you've talked about with like women as kind of creative producers, because you're doing that too, whether you might not see it that way because you're very research oriented. the
Right.
reality is like on social media everything is a little piece, you know,
Right.
and your writing is creative writing, even if it's more research based, you know, a lot of people are seeing it and thinking of, oh, they're seeing photographs, they're seeing writing, they're seeing
Well,
a
yeah, because it's
creative
like
product.
at the end of the day, what
Yeah.
you put on social media, you make active choices of how to word things, what you put in and what you leave out, what images.
Yeah, it's
you know?
curated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering like how you see yourself as a creative, or maybe you don't, right? Or how like yeah, like how you see yourself as a creative producer.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, so yeah, I mentioned curation, so I definitely am doing that. Because this started out, I did actually start out with an Instagram account that got spammed and shut down.
Yeah, we know.
And
We
then
thought, we were like, where'd it go?
yeah, I was like super bummed. And then I realized, okay, so yeah, with the website, it actually makes sense because then it's sort of a place that's consistent and I can kind of go off and add things to, because so maybe my creative role is like I am a bit of a connector too. Like just the other day, this guy in Germany who knew Karina Go-Go Spreiter, the 80s skateboarder, he wrote me and just sent me like all of these photos and more links, and then I got to update the website so that it's a living kind of dynamic document. And like, so Instagram is kind of like a one-off and it's a shout out, like anyone know more? And then I kind of pull it more and then filter it back into the website and then have that. And I'm kind of obviously you've seen it's a bit nerdy, like I've got the decades and then the names. So it's just trying to create a little structure because there's quite a few articles out there about history of women skaters, but they tend to kind of choose, like there's like a certain canon that gets represented and they're all valid. Like, you know, you've got Pat McGee from 1960s, like
of course.
Like there's sort of
got it, you know.
Caravan, you know, Melissa Steamer, like all of those sort of some pretty heavy hitters. But yeah, I think I do enjoy the hunt of the elusive, like the ones that are kind of like, what's their story? So that I think that's my creative goal, sort of going down little strange internet holes and tracking people down, and
which is great because we also we work a lot with, like, you know, we photograph a lot of women and LGBT skaters, and we really like focusing on people who are beginners, like, you know, we love doing that. We photograph people that it's like their first day on a board and they're like, oh, what are you going to take a picture of? And it's like, you skating, like you're
stepping up, taking a risk, like you're doing it.
But it's so like crazy to think about, because even them asking that question, which is valid, right? And it's valid in that we have historically been told that if you don't throw yourself from a roof, whatever you're doing on a board is not worth a picture. And it's kind of like, you know, I feel like for an average person, even just standing on a board, they don't realize that it's something, you know. It's like, okay, try like cruising, and some people can't, which is fine. It's the process, but it's, you know, I think some of the things that Romina would mention to me with your thesis is like the idea of what was seen as like proving yourself to be part of a community
validated,
that it was already so like against the mainstream, and like then being
a scene within a scene,
and then being a woman, like how your femininity then was used against you because then you couldn't do things apparently, or you should
interpretations of femininity. So and there's all people have all kinds of different takes on it, but it's fascinating.
No, it's incredible. And what I think we're gonna see more of, right, is the idea of like where like what you had in your thesis about just women athletes in general. Now skating is being seen as like a legitimate, it's in the Olympics,
right.
It's like it's real, it's not, you know, you're not messing around, like, you know, it's a real career choice, but you know, then we do start seeing that those kinds of issues as a woman athlete, that of like where your athletic ability is equated to your like sexual appeal, you know.
Yeah, how about you? Yeah, if you're selling, if you're sponsored, like they
Yeah.
can manipulate you if they want to, and if you're
It's like
acceptable to that.
yeah, it's like you can get sponsored if you're really hot and you're really good, but being good is just not enough. You also have to be really hot. It's like, you know,
I wonder, like, you know, you haven't been someone who has been into skateboarding for such a long time and now researches skateboarding or has been researching. What do you think of this trends, like comparing like how it was before to what you feel like it's now? Like, what is your opinion, or how do you feel about this?
I think it kind of goes through interesting trends. Like I've sort of, they talk about like the first wave of skateboarding in the 60s and 70s, and sort of how it's kind of been inclusive to certain demographics, sort of the bleach blonde surfer girl, and it's kind of they've been sort of welcomed in, and then a few individuals have to break through, like Kim Suspitas and Judy Oyama, some of the BIPOC early skaters, and then skateboarding tanks, and then no one cares about skateboarding. And then it kind of comes out into like the 80s, for example, and then it's a real battle. Like if you want to skate as a woman, like it's like, oh, to get any coverage. Like actually, I kind of love researching the 80s and 90s because it's just so challenging to get some substance. So yeah, it definitely goes through waves, and I think it's also dependent on the individual. Like, I think women who skateboard tend to be pretty independent, pretty fierce, pretty awesome, and kind of rogue. So I don't know. I think they'll stand on their own two legs and sort of call their own shots with sponsorship and whatnot, and how much coverage they get. So I think skateboarding is always going to be slightly different from like the sports scene in general. Like we're always going to be a little bit more rogue. But yeah, again, it could change with the Olympics, and as you mentioned, it's like this career option, and it could be like a game changer for someone to, you know, elevate themselves and their family. Like I think some of those stories out of Brazil, some of the young women who
oh my god, Brazil is putting out like
I don't know
what
what they're doing, but like they're really doing something.
Brazil
and
Japan,
but like completely like can alter their life and the life of their family, so they may have to do some things that they're not necessarily comfortable with. And I don't know, I'm hypothetical. I'm like I'm in a tiny little bubble and in an isolated community, and I mean even to
don't know about, like with social media, like how do you think
how has social media, like, how have you seen it affect,
because like, for example, you know, you talk about covering the 80s and how it's so challenging to figure out who this person was, and now we have social media who you know, the amount of skate videos is overwhelming on a daily basis, and you can definitely trace every person back to whoever it is, you know. And not just like skate videos, like photographs, anything. You can find anything now on Instagram, or I don't know, I really just use Instagram, so I don't know the other ones. But
well, that's actually funny because I still have a Facebook account, because I think there's a certain generation that I find more photos of women from like maybe the 70s who are more on Facebook. That makes sense. Some of them have migrated to Instagram, but it's kind of curious, different generations that use different platforms.
I actually have like a very specific question. I'm kind of curious to know, like, have you are you working also with video footage? Has that been something that you've considered? Is it way too difficult to try to find that stuff, or like how is that?
Like on the website, I don't mind putting in some YouTube links. Like I do add some footage there, but on Instagram, like I've just kind of stuck to photos and sort of magazine content. I'm sure I could learn how to do little clips, but I'm kind of embarrassed. I've only been on Instagram since October 2020.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm a bit of a Luddite. Like I resisted it. I was on Facebook, and then I cut myself off. And then I think during the pandemic, I just kind of missed people and being part of their lives. So that's why I joined. So I've just been keeping the Instagram pretty basic.
Right.
But on the website, like I'll add in some footage there when I can
And
find
so
it.
when you started the website, was it simultaneous with the Instagram? Was it like, or was it like, I'm gonna do this website, and then you were like, maybe I should put this on social media, or like, how did that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So when Instagram and then crashed, and then I went straight to the website, and then I was like, oh no, Instagram's still pretty sweet because yeah, you make these connections with people and they can share. So I'm a little bit behind on, like, I'm trying to when I do a new post I just try to keep up to date.
Yeah. Do you see like, I know this is early, I know like this is relatively like something that you're doing more for your own free time and something that is more recent that you started to do this, but have you thought about kind of where the future of this is going to go? Like, have you thought about where it could go, like?
Have you ever thought about making your own magazine?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Or even just thinking about like an exhibition or something,
Yeah, like,
oh man. Yes, I do work full time. And originally, like, I thought, like, I had made this ebook in 2014. It was sort of it wasn't that intensive, but it was history of women in skateboarding.
The one.
Yeah. And then I took it down because like there were some dead names of people, and I was like, oh, I just want it to be current and like to respect people in that sense. So I took it down, and then I think like right now I'm just in the website bubble. I had imagined someday doing like a sweet coffee table type book, but then it's just a lot of work. So right now this is all I can manage.
Yeah, I'm definitely like, I definitely was thinking like future, just because right now it's more like you're gathering everything, and then maybe like with time I only ask because I did study bookmaking in school, so I'm always like very interested in how things can be made into books, and even just thinking about like how this kind of thing could work in an exhibition and that kind of thing. Like,
oh man,
it's just like so exciting. I just love it. I'm just like,
I would need someone like you and that kind of vision to collaborate with.
That's the thing. So I didn't go into library sciences because instead I went into museum studies and printmaking and bookmaking and stuff like that.
Very cool.
But which is like aligned, I feel like. But I'm very like, I think there's so much, again, this idea of these archival silences, for me, it's very important that we project these voices, and have it be a very strong presence in the sense of like really having people know like there is so much history here, and even though some of it has been erased, there's a lot that is still here, and
honestly, even for the people who like identify with this individuals, right? Like, to be aware of the resilience, the constant fight to have a presence in the skateboarding community. And I remember like one of the people who we've talked to, our friend, her name is Jessie, and she started skating in the 90s. And she like kind of mentioned something like how important it is to know about skate history, because you go to a skate park and you never know who you're gonna run into. And that, I think that's such an awesome thing about skateboarding, that unlike other sports, it's very easy to run into like a legend at a skate park.
It's like, I'm not
gonna happen anytime.
and with men, well, they have the advantage that there's been coverage, but with women and queer individuals, it lacks. So you
don't even know.
And so it's true. So cool, because what you're doing is really offering not just something to those people who you're doing your piece about, but you're offering also to this generation and the generations coming forward, like an opportunity to learn about someone who they can identify with, and
Nice.
a little bit about too their own history, in that like, damn, you
Yeah.
know, like you know who's that? Like, is
Wow.
that really that person?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. And
Well, I'll
it's
tell you a little story what kind of kicked me in the butt. So I was at the skate park. I think I was, yeah, early 40s, so about 41, 42. And there was this other guy who was a dad, sort of maybe late 30s. He was there and he brought his two daughters. And I just like went over to him, like, oh, that's great. You brought your daughters and, you know, like both getting back into skateboarding and, you know, what stretches do you do? And I thought we were having a bit, you know, just a rapport as older people, older skaters. And then he turned to me and said, oh yeah, back in the 90s, when I skateboarded in Vancouver, there were no women skateboarders. He said that to my face. And I was just like, I just told you like that I was true. And I was like, no, that's not true. Like, I actually researched this. Like, I wrote a thesis about this. Yes, there were skateboarders. And I was so mad. I was just like, you have two daughters and you know nothing. And he's sort of like, yeah, first time I saw women skateboarders because I started following the barracks and like they, you know, the Battle of the Barracks. And that was his first exposure to women skaters. And then apparently we didn't exist.
right.
And I was just like,
and
I got pretty mad.
That's another thing to think about, right? Is not just the way that this kind of like history is affecting women skaters, but is affecting men skaters, you know, for them to be better allies, for them to get a better context of the work that we put in,
and even just like rewrite their own memories of like skating, and that like you think that this was all about men, but women existed and they were in those spaces, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to reflect on why you don't remember any of this.
Exactly.
Like your brain just deleted
their
for
example, that's sometimes part of why I can struggle with the term non-traditional skater, which has been coming up a lot. I struggle with it because I'm like, well, who defines these traditions? Who's remembering these traditions? I also struggle with it because it centers the other, you know, like for example, and I'm only thinking about this because you were talking about the acknowledgement, but you know, I took a decolonization class and we would talk about the fact that even the term decolonization is already centering colonization, you know,
as the
already so it's like by
it's
saying
like in the middle,
so it's like by saying non-traditional, you're already centering like the traditional instead of
normalizing the norm.
Everything
else is other
instead of just being like, well, these are just like women, LGBT, like people of color who are skaters, you know, like that's just a more accurate
because
depiction.
because then it kind of becomes like this, like we're like an extension of it, like as opposed to like,
again,
no,
like what you're saying, like we were never there, which
we just
always part of the tradition. You just didn't see it, you know, like, and that's not the same thing, you know.
I love what you said though, like encouraging men to become allies by being exposed to this too, because like I was just thinking there was a woman that I did actually interview who was part of this like 90s skateboard video. Her name was Lisa Wetsky. And it was crazy because I should have known about her like long time ago because she was skating just a little bit before me in Vancouver. So I did this post about her and tagged like the skate park where she was, you know, learning vert and everything. And then suddenly I did actually get all of these memories. These guys were like, oh yeah, that was the girl who like encouraged me to drop in. She was the one that saw me on the side of the road and drove me to the skate park. And they actually realized like she's pretty badass, like you know, suddenly recognizing that she put herself out there all by herself. And like, so I think they're slowly cluing in, like the women skaters, especially when they're sort of doing it solo, like in times when it was very unusual, I guess. It's pretty hardcore. And so I think they're coming around and recognizing, but not everyone, but it takes,
well, I mean, it's always going to be like a complicated battle, you know. I think like there is that kind of there's always going to be people who have no willingness to understand and who are not interested in learning, you know. But I think that the people who are interested and are willing to learn, that's way more valuable than
and at the end it's like I would assume that your priority, it's not even that. It's like, you know, why waste years trying to convince someone who just doesn't want to listen when
Good
you can
point.
just, right, like you can just use that work instead of like to convince someone, you can uplift the people who they
Right.
identify with.
Yeah.
And some of their extended family, like a couple times I've had like, oh my gosh, that's my mom. And like on Instagram, nice. I was like, your mom is amazing.
Do you even know how cool your mom
so
is?
cool.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
it was super funny.
So you were
Awesome.
saying that,
Yeah, their moms
right,
were reaching out.
Yeah, just some really like lovely feedback, and that makes it worth it, and that's motivation to just keep going. And because there's actually a lot that I want to get through. Like I've got this like ongoing list of interesting people, and lots of drafts, and so yeah, I just want to keep at it, and that's good motivation when I get the feedback. And likewise, this conversation is getting me pretty stoked.
Yay. No, it's awesome. I think, you know, we really love what you're doing, and it's very exciting for so many reasons, I think. I'm also like, I'm thinking about, I was thinking about also like how you've noted, because you talked a little bit about like there's people who had like dead names or certain like things. I'm also curious to know like how how queerness was maybe not acknowledged, but it was there, you know. I did
Yeah.
like in your thesis, you did mention a little bit about this idea of like masculinity and lesbianism and that kind of like those things. But I think now it gets so much more interesting because there's,
well, okay, first of all, can you, because like when Romina says that, like all three of us know what we're talking about, but for the people who haven't read the thesis or not know, could you like talk a little bit about the masculinity and queerness and those identities, you know, what you talked about in your thesis, and you know,
Yeah.
forever.
Well, from my stance, I love skateboarding because like I could sort of pick and choose. Like there's a negotiation of your identity. Like you can feel like, yeah, you can go and skateboard, you can get scars, you can bleed, and it's like typically, oh, that's masculine, but it's not really. It's just like you're a skateboarder, you're embracing what you're doing to learn and to improve. Right. And actually, I think Terry Lawrence mentioned that as well. Like skateboarding was sort of an avenue to go into sort of some more traditionally masculine identities, but like who defines that as well? Right, like exactly. It's absurd. And so I think skateboarding is pretty special in that sense, but in history, like there has been some pressure on women athletes to kind of, yeah, as we talked earlier, to conform in some sense, to be, you know, sellable and, you know, safe as, I don't know why, but it's a strange history. But I think these days there's a lot more flexibility, a lot more open-mindedness. I hope that that you can really explore and be comfortable with whatever you're wearing, your style, who you hang out with. I think there's a lot more flexibility than in the past. And but I think skateboarding has definitely drawn, in some sense, more kind of just sort of outgoing, independent people who are not going to be, you know, swayed or told otherwise. You can't do this because it's inappropriate for you as a young woman. Like that's kind of why you want a skateboard. I think
it's honestly very interesting too, in that like what you were saying, you know, this traditional views of masculinity and all this like identities, but the idea that skating has always been this counterculture thing. Yes. And somehow it's still, for the longest time, like retain those very traditional, like you gotta be like shredding, you know, like and killing yourself. Right, and those things are very much associated with being a man. And
it's this proving ground of some sort.
And so it's so interesting how something that I feel like everybody sees as this counterculture like lifestyle or sport. I mean, some people don't even see it as a sport,
That's
but
true.
that they would still allow those very toxic views to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, this is funny. My mom actually apologized to me just like last year because she remembers this conversation she had with me. I have no recollection of it. So I guess when I was leaving home, coming out west to go to university, I packed my computer or whatever, my suitcase, and I brought my skateboard. And she remembers reprimanding me. She's like, "Why are you bringing your skateboard? It's so juvenile." Like she was embarrassed of it. And she didn't really like the way I dressed because I think I'd stolen some oversized clothes from my brother. and and then finally, she actually watched the Skateistan video, and she realized, oh, it's because in Afghanistan, I guess there had been no stigma associated with like that, scooting around on a board and wheels is for boys only. Like it wasn't, they hadn't been told that that's what it's supposed to be.
Right.
And so it really is, it is a toy. It is like, it's something that can be played with. And it occurred to her like, oh yeah, why should it just be for boys or for girls or for
Right.
someone of a certain age or ethnicity or whatever? Like, and so she had this eureka moment and actually called and apologized to me. So it's a really funny thing why it should be, determined that this is only appropriate for a certain person and a certain ability. Like,
How
we're
has
seeing
your
people contest that a lot now.
yeah,
Right.
how has your experience been? Because I know you were saying that you started skating again when you were like 40, like you picked it up again.
Yeah.
How was your experience now, like as an adult? I mean, we're also adults, but like, like
I'm
I
a
guess
child still at heart. I think of myself like
Yeah.
I'm 12.
But how has that experience been in terms of just feeling like, yeah, this idea that like we see it as like, oh, it's teenagers or young people do that, and once you're an adult,
Oh.
you're supposed to grow out of it. Like,
Yes.
how has that experience been for you?
Well, it's been great having like Instagram because there's been a lot of like I can see other older women either like get back into it or start from scratch in their
That's
older
always
years.
amazing when someone is
Yeah.
like in their 40s or 50s and they're starting. I'm like, yes.
Yes. I'm a little bit jealous though, because I know there's some really cool meetups in cities. Like I've tried to recreate it here. Like I know a mom who used to skate. Like I know a couple of people, but I am in a small town. So sometimes I feel a little weird and a little isolated, like at the skate park where there's like all these little kids on scooters and stuff. But I don't know, it's just such a good outlet. Like I don't think it should, yeah, it's
Oh, I have a question now in relation to that. So part of what we really focus on is how mental
yes,
health and skating intersects,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, we
Yeah.
hadn't even mentioned it yet.
Yeah.
That's your core.
Yeah, that's like our
Right.
whole thing. But we were
Right.
so excited about your thing that
Right.
we didn't think about
We're
it.
like, I don't even know what we're doing.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
But I would love to hear about, how you feel like skating affects your mental health, how you've noticed it affects other people's mental health. Obviously, mental illness and mental health issues do not discriminate against gender or sexuality, but we are very curious to kind of talk about the unique challenges faced by women and LGBT people in terms of mental health and how skating has affected that.
Well, I was just thinking back, like when I was writing the thesis and I was interviewing all my friends, all these interesting women, and we'd have like we'd come together and we'd have dinners together, and it was so much more than skateboarding. And like this was like pre, the Me Too movement, and but we all found this point of reference of some traumatic experience, for example. And it just kind of came out really naturally. And then we just sort of had this sort of safe network, like of friends, even though we were all kind of very different and very different backgrounds. Skateboarding brought us together. And then we found this other common ground of yeah, some trauma things that we could all talk about, and that we knew that we weren't alone. So that's really healthy. I think that's a really good thing when you find safe people. Yeah, you may have this, fun thing in common, but then you discover that, yeah, you've got a really good friend or someone that you can trust to look out for you. And yeah, that's all, throughout my whole experience skateboarding, all these individuals and good friends that I've skated with have been pretty special for that. Yeah, but otherwise, like, skateboarding is a great outlet. It challenges you to fail, to try things, and yeah, just persevere. And I think that's really healthy in life as well. Like, just to give things a go and not be perfect, and be kind to yourself in that sense. Like, okay, so I didn't land that trick, whatever, just keep at it, and your friends are stoked when you do. And I don't know, it's pretty fun. But yeah, but I think the social connection of yeah, the women that I've met and been able to be really transparent with is so special. Yeah.
I think people will sometimes underestimate how skating facilitates that transparency.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to talk about difficult things in front of someone that you've taken some nasty falls in front of,
Yeah.
like,
You've been vulnerable already.
yeah,
in front of
yeah, when
Right.
someone has already seen you kind of like
I mean, you've
fluttering
cried at
around,
times.
yeah. It makes sense then that it would be an open space to be like, hey, like, this other stuff
Yeah.
and I actually have we have this one amazing friend that we skate with who runs like a crew in South Florida, that her and I the other day we had this this was a while back, we skated together and we were talking and I was telling her something about my life and she said, did you ever notice that every time we skate together we end up talking about our trauma?
Oh,
Yeah, and I was like, that's crazy. Every time
Yeah.
we learn something new about each other in terms of like a traumatizing
Hmm.
experience. And I
It's
was like,
wild.
that's so interesting. I was like,
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, then, yeah, it sounds like, yeah, you've got a level of trust with that person.
Yeah.
So it's
To be
pretty
fair,
cool.
we've also at this point we have practiced, because part of this like project, right, is just opening up that conversation, admitting to the fact that trauma happens to a lot of people, whether that is a trauma that is very recognizable like sexual assault or abuse,
Yeah.
or whether it's less recognizable,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of things that can traumatize you that we don't even really think of as trauma.
Subtle.
And we've definitely practiced kind of opening up about those things, not being afraid to talk about it, because it's really important.
Yes.
Even thinking about like what you were talking about with like kind of the pre-Me Too movement,
Mhm.
even like when those kinds of movements happen, first of all, it's amazing because people talk about it. The
Yeah.
problem is that people then think, okay, well, we talked about it and we don't need to talk about it anymore.
Right.
It's been talked about. Yeah, check mark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We solved feminism.
And not just that, but they think because they have talked about it, or
Yeah.
society has in some way
Addressed it,
recognized
yeah.
it, that is not happening anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in reality, it never stopped. It's still happening,
Yeah.
sadly,
I mean,
too many people
yeah.
are being
Yeah.
abused, too many people are being sexually assaulted.
And even on like a less intense level, we have friends who have been sexually harassed at skate parks,
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, and not to diminish, of course, there are a lot of people who have great communities and their experience
Yeah.
has been amazing, and that's so awesome for them, and I love
Yes.
that for them. But these things are still happening,
Mhm.
happening every day to adult women and young girls and everyone in between, and it is very important to address the fact that they will continue to happen.
Yeah.
We just have to keep working towards talking about it and helping
Yeah.
people find healing, hopefully through
And,
skating.
And connection, and you're not alone. Yeah.
Right, but I was thinking too, like how it is like we talk about this idea of how difficult it is to talk about these things, and it is,
Yeah.
but it's also like difficult to hear about these things. Like
Right.
it
Can be triggering as well.
right. And
it's like you don't even it might trigger something you don't even realize, or you
Right.
forgot about, and you're like, oh my God, like, and the reality is a lot of people don't have practice connecting to
their feelings,
when they
or
feel
other
triggered.
people's
Yeah.
feelings, or they don't even know
Right.
how to react or respond in a
The
way.
empathy piece that's kind of,
Right.
yeah.
So it's
Hmm.
like even having these conversations is not even helping the person who, like, not just helping the person who is talking about whatever happened to them, but it's also
Yeah.
giving the other person the opportunity to learn to listen in a way
Mhm.
that, like, it's healthy for that person and
Yeah.
themselves. That, you know, that it's
Yeah. It's a reciprocal.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they can leave the skate park being like
A better
a better
person.
person.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Not feeling, yeah, burdened by it, but like, oh yeah, we had a really, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Which you,
exactly.
that's what you would hope from
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
exchanges, right? You don't expect anybody to fix trauma, because
Mhm.
that's not a thing. Like, how do you fix trauma? Like, you don't.
Yes.
You can like work through it, but it's never fixed. It's
Right.
always there, you know, like
Yeah.
but I
You can
think
find strategies and coping and
yeah,
safe
exactly.
places, safe people.
Right.
Yeah, which is like the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
That's as close as you can get, right, to fixing it. And skating gives people such a, it's like a, skating is a gateway drug to healing.
I love it. Catalyst for sure.
But yeah, I'm trying to think of what I was gonna say for.
Well, what's next for you guys? So you're doing like sessions, you do like
Yeah, so we do
webinar?
a lot. We do so much.
Yeah, we do so much.
We have kind of the Instagram where we do a lot of photographing. We
Yeah.
talk, we haven't talked so much about it on the Instagram, but we talk a lot amongst ourselves about like the female gaze in terms of
Okay.
photography,
Right.
because we both also photograph and do videos.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of document women and LGBT skaters, while also when we are skating with them, we sit down and we talk to them about these issues. We're like,
Right.
you know, we
I don't know if you've seen our Instagram, but like
Yep.
whenever we have the opportunity to photograph whoever we're photographing, we send them questions for them to answer, and then we
Yes.
have I like kind of like a little story of whatever they want to share.
yeah.
So it's not just like, you know, this person who's skating, but this
Yep,
person,
they land this trick
Yeah.
and this trick. Yeah.
They have this whole story,
right?
you
Like,
know?
and
Yeah,
you
I
know,
get it.
there's more to this than just shredding, you know. Like,
Yeah.
people are human, and we all
Mhm.
have feelings, and
Yeah.
And then
I get it. Yeah. I was just thinking like, so some of the women that I feature there, some of them are in the Skateboarding Hall of Fame, and they
Right.
have like a little bio that often comes with it. And so sometimes I use that as like a foundation,
right.
but I love it when I actually find like the grit, like who
Right.
are you? Like, okay, so you won these contests, like that's fabulous. But like,
Who are you?
yeah, who are you? And like, I'll find out like, oh, actually this woman launched the first girls skate night in 1976 at the Carson skate park. Like,
Right.
okay, so that to me has value. Like,
Of course.
I want to know that stuff. But yeah, the other stuff is very cool, and it like, yeah, it shows.
But it doesn't really quite tell a story, you know.
Yeah.
It's more to someone than just a trophy or a trick.
Yeah. That's the gold.
Yeah. We also you know, we create a lot of our own merchandise to kind of like raise funds, because the goal really is to, so last year we traveled through Europe, Turkey, and Morocco for 5 months, and we photographed women and LGBT skaters like everywhere we went, just talked with people, made connections with people. We ended up doing all sorts of crazy things because of the people we met. It was super fun. And so the goal is to kind of just do that around the world. So like the next step, the next logical step is the United States. What?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, is the United States. And so this summer we're starting like a little eastern part. We're gonna like split it up into some chunks. We were literally just talking today that we have to go to Canada at some point.
Hey, yes.
Because it's really like, we really want to do it worldwide. But that's like the term goal, you know. So
cool.
we hand make
fingerboards. We also hand make fingerboards. And well, last year when we traveled for 5 months, we gave them away. They all have
like little affirmation kind
of.
Like
yes. Oh my gosh. all handmade.
Yeah, all handmade. We hand make every, like, we press the wood, we sand it, we paint them.
Like
we do all of it. Yeah, we do all
So
of it.
what a blast.
we
That's
treat
fun.
them as little art pieces they're
Yeah.
also able to
Mementos.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and you know, for us, like we gave like so many away in Europe, Morocco and Turkey.
Sweet.
Just like like I made a bunch after I left an abusive relationship, and that was kind of like my way to process and cope through that trauma. And then I had so many, and I was like, you
What
know,
am I gonna do with this?
right,
Yeah, it's a positive.
right, and the
outlet.
boards did what they needed to like offer, like to me, like
Mhm.
you know, they helped me, and so I was like, you know what, like I'm not gonna fix anybody's problem with this, but maybe I can like
Remind them of the
right of
possibility.
or
Yeah.
like, you know, maybe they're having a terrible day, and maybe for 5 minutes they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is so
Yeah.
cute, and you know, I have now
Yep.
this
The connection, the gesture is so sweet.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, like, the next thing we're doing is just like traveling. We are planning on doing some really fun stuff in the summer, in
Yeah.
like the east, like northeast and midwest area, and kind of like the east coast of the United States.
Yeah. Like
Um,
we try, I don't know if we're gonna mention it, but we try to organize events.
yeah, no, I hadn't mentioned it yet.
So like skate
Like skate, yeah,
events
skate events.
Yeah.
that focuses on women and LGBTQ individuals, but of course it's open to everybody.
Yeah.
It's just more like, so when people see that flyer and they identify with that, they can be like, that's a safe space for me.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah.
So yeah, we try to like get local artists involved and local musicians, and kind of have like
What
a
a
good
blast.
time, and you
Yeah.
know,
Sounds like such a fun summer. Like, yeah, lots of great activities.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's
we're really
honestly like a
excited.
blessing. I
Yeah.
think like there's like this thing that Tony Hawk talks about when
Yeah.
he's like, you know, you don't realize that you're living
Living
the
the dream,
dream.
yeah.
And so you think back and you're like, damn, I was living the dream. And
But we
then-
realize it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
and I want
Be
to thank
grateful.
Tony Hawk for that, because I think of
Yes.
that very often, and I'm like,
Yeah.
he's right.
Yeah.
And we've been doing that since really
Last year.
right, like
Wow.
and it hasn't
Sustain
been
it. Keep it going for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're, you know, honestly, like, we, at this point, this is what we do full time.
Wow.
We work super hard on it, and
Yeah.
you know, like, that's why also, right, like, we love what you do, because we know
Right.
how hard it is already to keep up with these things. You already have a full-time job, and
Juggle.
you're already, yeah, and you're
Right.
on top of that doing all this other stuff, and it's just very exciting because you know, I do feel like sometimes with the growth of social media and the internet, there has been this kind of turn away from more in-depth conversations. It's all
Right.
very superficial. And
Yeah.
I like when I can, like, I look at your Instagram and, you know, like, it's a long caption and I get into it, you know, and
Yeah.
sometimes-
I was like, oh, should I? Because I know they changed their format now. I was like, oh
sometimes-
crap.
sometimes we'll have really long captions, and
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
people have told us before something like, well, I go on Instagram and I don't want to read, and it's like, well, then
Yeah.
that's not for you, you know,
It's
like,
not
that's
for
okay.
you.
And
Like,
it's, you know, I'm like, we are trying to cover a community that has been
Yeah.
overlooked. Why would I now?
yeah, why would I
cut
have
their
it superficial?
story?
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
Instagram decides to be like this, and people don't want to read it. Like whoever wants to read it will read it, and
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
this person deserves to have their
have the
story
space, yeah.
however they wish they want to tell it.
Yeah.
It is pretty wonderful though, because like I was just thinking back, like you were talking about traveling and stuff. So I think it was in the year 2000, I went to Prague and Czech Republic.
Yes, when I was
And,
when we read on your thesis, we skated in some of the spots you were
Right.
talking about. So we were
Oh,
like, oh my
yeah.
god, you're there.
It was so crazy. And like, so
Yes.
I was studying there with like a group of Canadian students, and none of them made any contacts or any friends with the
Wow.
locals. And like day one, I went to Stalin, I met two girls who skated, you know, they couldn't speak English, but we had skateboarding in common. Like
Yeah.
I was staying with their grandparents in Bohemia in a
Oh
cottage. And like,
wow.
it was nuts. And like,
And
but
what's
it was
funny is, like, that's how we
fun.
spent basically 5 months. Was we would go to
Right.
a skate park, meet someone there, and then they were our new best friends, and then
and then suddenly we would also go to the like 3 other countries with them.
They would hit us up, we're going to
introduce
you want to come, and we were like, like
it's the best. It's so much, it's organic and like social media is great, and like maybe you would have made some connections in advance through that, but like,
and we did. But it's different. It's different when you just show up to a place and everyone's skating and hanging out. And especially when we get practice, we go up to the girls, we're like, hey, how long have you been skating? How are you? We do this thing. Like, you know,
your
it's like
face.
We're just like, awesome. Hey, and they're always so excited, and they're always like, like, oh my God. And you know, like they get so excited by other women coming up to them and being excited to skate with them too.
You know? Well, this is great because like I wasn't sure how things were these days, like, because like that's my experience growing up when like, there was no just email, like email was just introduced or whatever, like, so it was definitely like that in person, like, oh my gosh, my soulmate right here.
And I feel like that's where a lot of, I mean, to be fair, social media also, there are people that you follow sometimes and then you meet them and you're like, oh my God, I've followed you for forever, it's amazing to meet you finally, you know. But I think that, there's definitely still that in-person connection with skating where you just kind of go to a skate park and someone's there and for whatever reason you just start you just start chatting up,
and then by the end of the day you're like
you're tight.
Exactly.
Well, that's how I had my best friend, Rhiannon Bader. She runs the Good Push, which is a pretty cool thing.
Awesome.
Well, the way we became friends was I had actually quoted her in my thesis because she was one of the very few women who had like a skateboard website, and she'd interviewed Jessie Van in this magazine. So I quoted her, and then like, I know you, like, I can't remember, we saw each other at a skate park, and then we all clued it.
You're like best friends.
And literally like we joined we had an all-girls motorcycle club together.
When you said that in your email, I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Oh man,
are you
kidding? It was so much fun because like we had to get to the skate parks. The skate parks were all scattered all around the Lower Mainland, and so some of our friends, like Michelle, had got a motorbike, and like so we became a gang, and like our skateboard in the back.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. That's gonna be a van.
I want to see pictures of this.
Where's the archive of that?
It's out there.
It better be. I want to see those like skateboards on motorcycles.
On the motorcycle. Oh, that's so cool.
I highly encourage getting a motorbike.
No, that's super awesome.
Telling my parents that, they'll be like, are you serious? Like,
it's raining enough.
Like, it's like you always are falling on that skateboard.
Now you're gonna fall off the bike.
You the double us, right? Like,
it's worth it.
No, I'm sure. Like, it looks like amazing.
Thank you so much for talking with us. I'm gonna end the recording in a second, just so that we can be like.
But okay, but before we end it, like we end the recording, is there anything that you would like people to know about anything, you know? About what you do, about nothing that has to do with you, about like
whatever,
nothing to do with me. I don't know. I'm just really grateful for, because sometimes I do feel like, oh, I'm, poaching, old articles or journalists' work, and like, so I just want to express gratitude to everyone who's like, who've done the interviews, who've got like the prime documents, who've done the work, who've made, like, I've got so many zines, and it's just, they're gold, and it's worth it. Like, make the effort to, even though you think it's silly, but it's like a capsule, it's a time capsule. So I definitely encourage, more cultural production, more zines, more, I don't know, creative outlets, because in time, like, it's got such value. I think it's wonderful. So a big thank you to all the people who've done interviews and who are skateboarding and making magazines, and I'm grateful for it.